Tech Reimagined, redefining the relationship between people and technology. Brought to you by Endava. This is Tech Reimagined.
Hello everyone, I'm Bradley Howard and I'm happy to welcome you back to our Tech Reimagined podcast. In season 1, we looked at how technology is reimagining the way that we live and work, from healthcare, payments and the future of work, to the role of AI and how we move people and goods and the gender gap in technology. Now in season 2, we'll aim to explore the big questions around technology and the industries that are impacting our lives. Today we have with us a very exciting guest, and it's an honour to be able to get his view on how he thinks technology will continue to play a significant role in everything that we do, from the way we live, work and run our lives. Guy Kawasaki is the Chief Evangelist of Canva and the creator of Guy Kawasaki's Remarkable People podcast. He was the Chief Evangelist of Apple and the trustee of the Wikimedia Foundation. He's written 15 books, including Wise Guy, The Art of the Start 2.0, The Art of Social Media, and Enchantment. Guy, welcome to the Tech Reimagined podcast. It's so great to have you here. Can you tell us a few words about yourself?
I was the software evangelist in the Macintosh division for Steve Jobs. So my job was to convince companies to create software and hardware products for Macintosh. Now, this is in the mid-'80s, so one thing is I'm living proof that if you do one thing well, you can coast for a long time off your reputation. I have also been an entrepreneur, a venture capitalist, and today I have the very enviable position of being the Chief Evangelist of Canva, online graphics design service out of Sydney, Australia. And my passion, if not obsession, is my podcast, Remarkable People.
Your podcast and surfing as well.
Well, I wasn't going to go there, but okay. Yeah, as soon as this ends, I'm going surfing.
Oh, we're all very envious. So you've driven innovation and change agendas many times in your career, from Apple, Fog City, Emailer, and now Canva. So if you were to think about the way that you use technology in your everyday life, how do you think it will keep changing the way that we live and work?
I hate to be chicken about this, but it's almost unimaginable to imagine how it's going to change, because I would have never predicted that we would be here where we are today in 2021 if you had asked me this in 2010 or 2000, much less 1984. So let's take the extreme example. So 1984, introduction of Macintosh. You know, this is like a revolution. Personal computers, empowered people, no more minis and mainframes, one person, one computer operating without an IT department, MIS guidelines, et cetera, et cetera. So for 1984, you would have told me that in 2021, that we would have phones that are far more powerful than what's on your desktop. They would be connected and talking to each other and talking to the cloud. What was the cloud? I would have told you, what in the world are you talking about? I mean, in a sense, we haven't gone as far as the Jetsons, where we all have our personal flying saucers and all that. But man, I would have never imagined we are where we are.
So what do you think the key drivers are for the change in that innovation? I mean, who was sitting there going, we need to have a mobile phone in everyone's hand. We need to have the internet.
This is one of those phenomena of Silicon Valley where we throw a lot of stuff up against the wall. A very few number of it sticks. And we go up to what's stuck and we paint the bullseye around it. And then we claim victory and we say, we hit the bullseye. Well, one thing I've learned is you can always hit the bullseye if you paint it after you see what's stuck on the wall. So, basically, computing power is getting better and faster and much cheaper. And so, with that, that's kind of the natural resources, the raw material, the empowering technology. And then it's just kind of imagination. I mean, who would have thought? Well, I'm friends with Dave Weiner, and Dave Weiner was intimately involved with the creation of blogging and podcasting and RSS. And it's people may look back and say, okay, so this person invented this and it was at this date, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not how it goes. I mean, so basically people, they get a technology and they say, okay, so now computers are talking to each other. Wouldn't it be interesting if they could do this? And somebody else would be working on a parallel process, and, and somebody at MIT or somebody in Oxford. And it's very hard to predict, because there is no sort of direct line from here to there. It's fits and starts, and it's a lot like evolution, if you ask me. I mean, it is a form of evolution. I don't, unless you believe God created the earth and, everything in 7 days, it's hard to predict how we went from protozoa to, Stephen Hawking and Stephen Wolfram.
So what do you think the key trends are going to be for technology in the future? Do you think it's going to be around healthcare, transport?
Technology and power is just going to get better, faster, and cheaper. There's no question, right? Moore's law on steroids. So there's no question that's going to happen. And then, given those factors, it's kind of up to the imagination of two people in a garage, two people in a spare bedroom, two people in a dorm. And I don't think that, you and I sitting here can predict what idea somebody is going to come up with in 4 years, maybe even in 4 months in a dorm. And we're first going to be skeptical when we hear about it, and we're going to say it's never going to work. And then it's going to work, and we're going to look back and say, why didn't we invest in that? We're such dumbasses. So maybe what I've said so far is disappointing to you, because you thought, like, I'm so smart, I'm going to tell you the future and how exactly it's going to shake out. And, I'm this visionary, but I don't want to burst your bubble. I mean, in my experience in high tech, there's only been a couple real visionaries. One, of course, is Steve Jobs. And I would also say that Elon Musk is probably the closest thing we have to another Steve Jobs. Although, I just don't get Elon and his whole cyber currency thing. I mean, that's a whole nother subject, right? So depending on what emoji Elon Musk uses, Bitcoin goes up or down. Go figure. I mean, just who would have predicted that?
Whoever was looking at the cash kitty at Tesla at the time would have predicted that.
Yeah, I guess. But, would we have taken that seriously? No way. No way. So I guess, I don't want to seem chicken, and I don't want to seem like I'm punting, although maybe punting is a bad word, because in the UK, punting is going down the river on a boat. But in the United States, punting is the concept that in football, you get 4 downs to make the next milestone. So you get another 4 downs. And if you don't are close, you punt the ball, you kick the ball to the other team. And then anyway, it's like, I just need to explain punting, because people are going to say, what is he talking about? He spent too much time in Cambridge. So I guess I'm just trying to communicate the fact that no one really knows the future. And if anybody does tell you they know it, then that person is probably delusional. But the good side of this is that, 2 people in a garage, 2 people in a bedroom, 2 people in a dorm, they can still dent the universe, because nobody can predict what's happening. That is a beautiful thing.
And do you think that the pandemic, which obviously everyone around the world has had months to think about new ideas, or maybe many more people will be focusing on healthcare solutions and healthcare technology, do you think the pandemic has probably, I don't want to make it commercial or anything, but do you think it's kind of helped innovation, or do you think that the communication aspect has actually made it more difficult?
Other than in Florida and Texas and maybe 10 Downing, I think that when we look back, the pandemic is going to be one of the biggest influences in technology and modernization and revolutionary change ever in the history of man. You could make the case there was sort of the Industrial Revolution, steam engine, electricity, et cetera, et cetera. Now, those are primarily positive, right? Those were empowering technologies. But I think the pandemic has forced such a reorientation of everybody's mind that it's going to create changes totally unforeseen. And if you had told me that, Guy Kawasaki would not fly for a year and a half, I would have told you, yeah, maybe when I'm in a hospice, but as long as, I'm reasonably mobile and I'll be flying all the time. I have not gotten on an airplane in 16 or 18 months. And so I have a theory that great innovation occurs when simple questions are asked. Not about megalomaniac desires to control the world and all this kind of stuff. The question that I think that an entrepreneur, an innovator should ask is seeing the data, seeing the trends, taking your best guess, using your vision, therefore what? People can't fly for 18 months, therefore what? There are no in-person meetings and conventions, therefore what? Kids aren't going to school for 18 months, therefore what? And that leads to market opportunities. And I'll use a more positive example and historical. If you were to look back and you say, all right, so 15 years ago or whenever it was, some people came to the realization that there would be cell phones. Cell phones would have cameras. What a concept. Cell phones would have cameras, and they would be obviously on a data network. So people could take pictures and then share these pictures. Therefore, what? Therefore, everybody becomes a photographer. Therefore, what? Why don't we create a site where people can share pictures? What do you think we should call this? How about Instagram? You would have created Instagram. And so I think that's how great changes are made, that entrepreneurs ask a very simple question based on the data, the trends, whatever, their predictions, and they ask, therefore what? And they go create whatever they come up with.
Which leads us on nicely to our company, Endava. So we're an IT services company, developing software for companies in various industries around the globe. So if there was one piece of advice that you'd like to give us in regards to staying innovative, what would that be? Would you say just always ask the simple questions?
Well, I would give you two things. One is, yes, ask that simple question, therefore what? I think, for example, just in the past couple of days, so, really this kind of cyber terrorism, holding a company ransom, has just leapt to the top of awareness, right? So the kind of company you are, you have to ask yourself, well, now that everybody's scared that they're going to get ransomware and someone's going to call you up and say you can't log into your Macintosh unless you pay me $100,000, therefore what? Your company is stuck and we captured all your data. Therefore, what? The other way is working backwards as opposed to forwards. And so for me, working backwards means that rather than starting from the current capabilities of your company and the current things that you make and sell, that's working forwards. Working backwards means you start from the customer and you see what they need, and you work backwards from that to make your product and service match what they want to do as opposed to what you can or are currently doing. And I'll give you a negative example of this. So I learned an earth-shattering fact a couple years ago that Kodak invented the digital camera. And to this day, I still have trouble wrapping my mind around that. Like, Kodak invented the digital camera. How many of us use a Kodak digital camera today? Zero. And so they invented it, but they have absolutely been passed by. And so how did that happen? And I think it's because they always worked forwards. They said, we're Kodak. We know how to make chemicals. We know how to put those chemicals on paper and film, and we're going to sell this to people. If they worked backwards, they would have said, so, the people who are currently buying our chemicals on film and paper, what are they doing with it? They're preserving memories. So we are in the fundamental business of preserving memories, not shipping chemicals. And so if you work backwards from the customer, you say, okay, customers want to preserve memories. Right now, they're preserving memories with chemicals on paper and film. But how can they preserve memories better? Oh my God, wouldn't it be better if there was a digital camera where you could instantly look at your photo, you could share that photo, you could enhance that photo, you wouldn't have to take it to get developed, we wouldn't have to make all these chemicals, they wouldn't have to, pollute the earth, et cetera, et cetera. So if Kodak had worked backwards, they would be probably the combination of Canon, Nikon, and Fuji right now. Instead, they're like dust on the side of the road.
But it's always very difficult for companies to keep up to date with the next generation of technology. And all you need to do is just look at the top companies in the FTSE or the Dow Jones from 20 years ago, 50 years ago, and compare, because the only companies that are still around are some of the banks and the alcohol companies, and other than that, and if you think about it, alcohol hasn't really changed very much. Banks are reserve judgment on, but if you look at car companies and airlines, etc., they've struggled with the next pace of how market trends have changed.
Bradley, that's why it's easier to be the guest on a podcast than the CEO of a company, because you and I could tell everybody how to do things optimally, but if we had to go, well, at least speaking for myself, if we had to actually do that, that's quite a different challenge, right? So, and I think that ironically, the more successful financially that a company is, the more difficult it is to embrace change. To sort of rationalize what happened at Kodak, I mean, can you imagine that engineer going into his boss saying, "Hey, boss, I figured out a way that people don't have to buy film anymore." Can you imagine? Yeah, I can imagine. We'll be broke. So, go back into the lab and figure out how to put more chemicals on paper and film. Don't be showing me this digital camera thing. So, if it weren't for Elon Musk and Tesla, do you think that any car manufacturer in the world today would be making an electric car? I don't. I think Tesla single-handedly forced them to do it. And so, I mean, can you imagine an engineer inside of an existing car company going to his boss saying, "Listen, we should not be burning internal combustion. We shouldn't have fuels like this. It should be electric. The electricity is so much more efficient. We can use, natural resources to generate the electricity, blah, 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 blah," right? So, we got to stop engine development and we have to start motor development and battery development. Can you imagine that conversation taking place in GM? I mean,
Guy, thank you so much for joining us on Tech Reimagined and the chance to have these interesting conversations today. To all of our listeners, thank you for joining us on season 2. Don't forget to subscribe and please tune in next week for another episode on our podcast. We promise to make even more exciting conversations. Thank you.
Tech Reimagined. Redefining the relationship between people and technology. Brought to you by Endava. This is Tech Reimagined.